most of them actually fall into this assumption that people just know and people don't. What exactly am I going to do in this guide? Why should I even be reading this guide? If you introduce the hurdles, I'm just gonna close the tab, go look for something else. It's insane how many times ChatGPT or Claude get these basic hello worlds just wrong. One of those neon signs of sorts. It's like hello world, and that's the starting point for it.
In this video, we're going to dig into a key aspect of helping developers adopt APIs, the Getting Started Guide. Every API should have one, but they're often overlooked as something that can make or break developer success when using your API for the first time. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, we'd love it if you were. We've welcomed a ton of new subscribers in the past few weeks, and if videos about API development and best practices are the thing that you're looking for, then this is the channel for you. Go ahead and give the subscribe button a big old click down below, and let's get into the video. To help us out today with some of the best practices and to give us some tips on where you should be going with getting started guides for your API, I'm joined by a good friend and someone that I've known for a long time, Amit Jotwani. Amit, how are you?
Good. Good to see you, Martin. Super excited to be doing this with you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about you. Where do you come from? What's the background? What puts you in a position to be talking about this kind of stuff?
I've been in developer relations / developer advocacy / developer education. There's so many ways to slice this for over 10 years. I started my dev advocacy career with a startup back then called Mashery. They were doing API management as a gateway of sorts to help developers access to those APIs. That got acquired by Intel, so I was with Intel for about 2 years, and then I went on to be at Amazon on the Alexa squad for about 5.5 years, helping developers build skills, speaking at conferences, creating content that developers would want to use and actually build voice apps or skills as they were called. So I've seen both sides. Being a developer myself, I've obviously built things, and I've also consumed guides. And that's where some of these things that we'll be talking about will come into the picture as to what does a good developer experience look like when you're trying to build something, reading guides or watching videos or whatnot.
And you've got a website called Curious Mints. Tell us a little bit about what Curious Mints is.
The idea was to build this into something that is driven by curiosity. So by nature, I'm very curious to learn new technology. And the idea was I often ran into situations where I don't know what the hello world looks like for that specific tech stack. And I thought that I would actually use this as a way to, as I'm experimenting with my curiosity, I would actually write those nicely written hello world guides where each guide is quote unquote a mint of curiosity. I'm turning that into something that prescribes to the kind of guides that I would want to see. So the idea is that to build those guides and following a specific format, following a specific checklist, if you may, of things that I would want to see. Now, these are obviously very opinionated. There's so many ways to do this, but these are some things that I think what a good guide should look like.
Just for the uninitiated, I guess, let's start off with asking, what is a Hello World guide? What are they, and why are they so important to get right?
The idea with a Hello World guide is that you're writing, as with programming, one of the first programs you write is literally just printing Hello World on the screen. The idea is to get you initiated with how to do a specific thing, a very basic MVP of sorts with that specific technology. So if you're writing Python, you would want to know how to write print Hello World with Python. When you extend that into learning a new API, for example, I'm going to take an example of, say, sending a message using Twilio, which is this SMS API that I think developers adored on until a few years ago, at least. And the idea with that was how do you send a text message using Twilio? And that's supposed to be a quick in and out sort of thing. I don't need to know any more details than the very basic thing. What happens is that this is supposed to be get you excited about a certain technology, and it's not supposed to be everything. It just doesn't need to be the complete sink being thrown at you. It just needs to be something very simple that gets you excited enough, and then you want to learn more about that.
Let's start off with some of the things that people get wrong about doing the Hello World guide when they're building a getting started guide for developers to start working with an API. What are the things that you've seen that people don't do well that are kind of the common mistakes that people are running into?
I think there's several things, but I find that most of them actually fall into this assumption that we make that people just know, and people don't. A lot of things like being so close to the product, you assume that, oh, like I'm just going to start off with like follow step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 without setting the context. For example, what exactly am I going to do in this guide? Why should I even be reading this guide? What should I already know? The prerequisites, what you will help me build out. So it's like with no context, so many guides, and I've been guilty of this myself, when all you want is just get this out there so developers can use it. We often forget these basic things as to again, the goal is not to have them follow the guide. The goal is to get them excited about your technology, and the way to do that is by setting some context so they know what to expect. So I think that even a short paragraph as to what this guide is all about, why they should be reading it, maybe excite them with some use cases even. That basic context, I think, is missing. And there's obviously like other things, but that I think is like the absolute must that a guide should have.
What are some of the other things that people tend to miss?
My absolute pet peeves with guides is that they don't always offer everything that I might need as part of that. So as an example, if it's an audio API, for example, and you want me to try out an MP3 audio file with it, give me the audio file. Don't let me go on like this scavenger hunt, adventure hunt of sorts, where I'm going to look for a specific file which should be existing on my laptop at that point. Also, the side effect of that is that it works against the API company itself, because if you provide that file yourself, you will provide probably a really good example of that, which makes the best illustration of your API. If you leave it to me, I'm probably not going to find that file. Second, if I find it, it's probably not going to be the best illustration of the capabilities of the API. So provide all the assets. I'm not going to go look for it. And again, remove all the hurdles, because if you introduce the hurdles, I'm just gonna like close the tab, go look for something else.
Because it's about speed, right? Like what you're trying to achieve here is the quickest possible time to Hello World, and anything that prevents that from happening, you're lowering the chances step by step of somebody achieving that. And because they can't achieve that, the chance of them actually going further into your API and adopting it, or at least being successful at doing something, is going to decrease, right?
Time to Hello World is in fact like a metric that should be measured and kept track of. And one of the ways to do this also is that you have other people do it, because you obviously know the kinks, you know what things to avoid, and you will probably do a really good job at that Hello World because you just know that yourself. But having other people who are not familiar with it follow that and measure that time to Hello World, I think is a really good metric.
Let's look at some examples of guides that you think are actually good getting started guides, so we can talk through some of the things that people have done and hopefully drop a little inspiration on people as to things that they might achieve for themselves. What have you got to show us?
So this is a guide that I wrote as a guest post for a company called LaunchDarkly. And LaunchDarkly is, for those who may not know, LaunchDarkly is a company that provides feature flagging as a service of sorts. So imagine you're building a product that requires certain flags. It should be only available in certain regions, or it should only be available to certain section or demographic of your audience. Instead of hard coding all of those things in your code, you can essentially just turn the flags on or off. You can set all sorts of logic for it. And all you're doing in your code is you call the API, and it decides what kind of flag. It's really a binary flag that it just returns based on those conditions. So I was using a few different technologies, and the challenge here was to introduce those technologies without getting too deep and distracted with those technologies, and keep the focus on launch directly here. So I just talked about setting some introduction, setting some context. So I start off with, in this guide, we'll build a dynamic email marketing system. So I set some context. I also say what kind of technologies we will use and why. I also talked about a little bit about the modules, and this is something that I think not a lot of guides do, and I think it's almost we owe the responsibility, honestly, I feel, to encouraging best practices. So if there's a certain thing, for instance, in my example, I'm saying that we will use Python.env for securely managing our API keys. Now that's something that I think every Python script or example that uses APIs should probably do. Instead of hard coding the API keys in your code, you should use Python, the dot environment variable module to manage those. So I mentioned that this is also something that we'll be using. And then we get into a little bit more context as to what is resend, which is another email API that I'll be using. And some of this is also coming from the point of view of, like, don't assume that people just know. We all come from different backgrounds. Not everyone is in San Francisco. Not everyone is familiar with all of the latest SaaS and products that are coming out. So I think we should lower the bar a little bit and assume that be a bit more welcoming of people who may be coming from different backgrounds. What you will learn is something I took from, honestly, from Twilio and SendGrid days. I remember that was almost always part of the blog posts, and that was really helpful. It set context for what I'm signing up for, what kind of knowledge can I expect to learn from if I commit myself to reading this further. And this is, I think, something that a lot of guides miss out. That if I decide that I'm not going to follow the whole thing, I just want to see the code. Include this link in whatever shape or form. This could be like an icon that's sitting on the right always in your series of blog posts, but include that GitHub repo or complete sample code that I can just copy paste and get on with it if I didn't want to follow this whole thing. Then we talk about what exactly we'll be building as part of this, and I explain that we'll be setting up these sorts of emails, the conditions for those flags, and then a little bit of the prerequisites. This is again something that I think a lot of guides miss out because they just jump straight away into step 1, step 2, step 3. But if I could, like, this whole thing would be some sort of like a template or a framework that I think every guide should have. So again, going back to setting up the context, and then what you will learn, what exactly we are building, and the prerequisites. I think these 3 would be every guide should include. And then obviously I get into some of the specifics. Here's a good example of what I was saying earlier, is that include the all the assets that you might need. So instead of saying that, you're going to need a users.db file, good luck creating that, I've included that in this GitHub repo. So I can just go here and get that GitHub database from here. And then I go into the specifics of it with screenshots. Screenshots is I would love to know your opinion on this, but screenshots has a double-edged sword. It definitely helps, but it can be a real pain to maintain. I try to annotate them as much as possible, and as you can see, this was like slightly complicated if you're doing this for the first time. So I wanted to make sure that the things that you're clicking on were like really highlighted, and then you come into the code parts. So there's a few things that I always do on the code part also, is that make sure that you are clarifying if there are any dependencies to be installed. So in this case, like I mentioned, we'll be using resend and python.env for storing the API keys. So again, trying to do this in a best practice sort of way that, you create a requirements.txt file, which is a standard Python way of installing dependencies. So I try to find opportunities as much as possible to use the best practices way as much as I can. I'm sure I'm doing things not completely in a standard way, but I try to do this as much as I can. And then this is something that I've done both ways, and I would love to know your opinion on this. Is that I try to explain code progressively, as to if I'm adding a specific thing, I will talk about that specific thing that I just did, and then just keep on building on top of that. And there's also I add a section as to what the expected output should be based on that code. And some of this, honestly, Martin, I think has changed after the onslaught of AI that we've seen. And I find that it's not as much that you're not trying to teach people how to write syntax anymore. It's not about the code or the way you actually structuring the code. It's more about what exactly are you trying to do with that code? What should I expect? The inputs and the outputs and the logic or the business logic is what's I think more important. People can write code. Like if once they understand what you're trying to do, they will probably write their own code. For example, another thing that I think I would put also, which I have not in this guide, is the somewhat related like a debugging sort of thing, or like common gotchas, or ran into this specific error. This is like a known thing. That's also like something I've seen some guys do, and that definitely helps, and may have helped here also to address those sorts of errors. And yeah, so I find like a lot of most of the blogs actually do a decent job of having a conclusion. But again, like I think there's an opportunity to use that to excite people, recap what you've done, but also excite them as to what else can I do with it. So having like some links there in that conclusion definitely helps.
That's great. There's so much in that one guide that I already know I've been guilty of missing out, but also that I just don't see in a lot of others as well, right? That there are elements of things
Yes.
that you see, but
Yes.
this is a very, as you would expect, a very full example of
Right.
all of the key things that are in here. And actually, yeah, that piece of what do I do now? Where do I go next? Right now that I've got to this point, what else can I do? You would
Right.
hope at this stage that you've got the developer curious enough to want to go on that journey. But if you don't provide the next step in that journey, chances are they may never actually go down that path.
But I also want to show you, if I can, like the example of a good Hello World guide, the way I expect them to be. So this is something that I have like a subdomain on guides.curiousmints.com. And what I do with this is that as I'm playing with new stuff, I write the Hello World guides for them as I would want them. So, and I visit this like pretty regularly. If I was, for example, trying to send an email using resend, I would just come here. And this is the way I think. I wish these kinds of guides existed for every API that I use. Send a basic email using the resend API. This guide demonstrates how to send a basic email. And this is probably what I'm looking for most of the times. So I can just copy this and replace my recent API key. And the big assumption that all of these guides make is that you're using the Python.env environment. So what I do is when I'm playing around with stuff is that I have a .env file sitting on my computer that has all of the API keys for all of the different API providers. And all I do is include this line in all my Hello World examples, and that just automatically loads up that API key. I don't need to do anything manual. So again, I'm doing this as a best practice of sorts. Hopefully this is something that people find useful. And then you keep scrolling down, and it just gives me step 1, step 2, and sending the email. And that's it. Similarly, you can go to, say, an OpenAI example. This will let you pull up like some company information again, show me the code, how to install the API, create a .env file if you don't already have one, and this is the Python script for it. And I cannot tell you how many times I come back to this specific page. And again, this is obviously very opinionated sort of page in that these are some of my go-to APIs. But I come back to this so often, even with AI, Martin. It's insane how many times ChatGPT or Claude get these basic hello worlds just wrong. You would expect that OpenAI at least would know how to do the chat completion API right using Python, but it just hallucinates so much even that this sort of page definitely helps me. And I wish these are the examples that I wish, or these are the format that I wish all API companies followed. Like I imagine there's a glaring, one of those neon signs of sorts. It's like hello world, and that's the starting point for it. Because even people say it's getting started, guys, but they just talk about everything else that is not important for someone visiting that page for the very first time in their life.
There's always a ton of additional information that you end up finding in there, and it's because a lot of times people do think that knowledge is important, right? But it's whether it needs to be a part of the getting started guide or not is a question that you need to ask yourself when you're actually going through the process of creating documentation, right? Does this need to be somewhere else, or is this really relevant to actually getting started? And if people didn't read this, which is highly likely, would their experience be impacted?
100%. And that's in fact one thing that I mentioned Kunal earlier. Kunal Batra and I, we've known each other for a while, and he worked with you at SendGrid, and then after that at Amazon we worked together. So we've been helping startups as we have a company, consulting company called HelloDX, and the whole idea with that was that what you were saying, when you are inside the product, you're too close to the product and you don't realize the things that you assume people will know, and people just don't. You have the curse of knowledge. You think things are obvious and they're not very obvious. So we help companies look at things from like a third person's point of view, come with a fresh pair of eyes, and it's amazing how many things open up to the product people. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, in most companies, there's going to be some kind of a review of any code that you're trying to commit to the code base. You really should consider your documentation and your examples, very much the same way, right? And have somebody else look through it, walk through it, make sure it makes sense to them. Obviously, if they're even less familiar with the space, it's probably better, right? Than because those assumptions, are still there with colleagues as well a lot of the time. But at least getting that second pair of eyes is an absolute must to ensure that it is as good as it can be, and you're just spotting the things that you think are too obvious, or the things that you've missed completely that would actually be really key to jumping from one step to the next.
I feel like even from the guide perspective, too many guides try to do too many things. In this guide, you will set up your Python environment. You will also call the API. You will call. Then we will have like 3 other things as part of the same thing, because you think that people will just keep doing it. And I think like maybe that's one principle to be followed also, is that one guide should do one specific thing. Write it like a well-written function of sorts that's returning just one thing. One, it's easier to maintain, but also it's easier for people to follow. It's clear what I will get at the end of this. And if you can always build on top of those. You can always guide them to the next one and to the next one. But that's maybe one way to keep things simple and clean.
What are your top 3 things that anyone writing and distributing a Hello World guide should remember to have on their checklist?
So I would say start off with some sort of context. Make sure it's very clear what they will achieve with that guide. That's number 1. Number 2 would be give them everything they would need, remove all the bottlenecks, give them every single thing that they will need to complete that. And then the third one would be show them the code. It's nice to give snippets of code, but then give me the final project. And I think I would include this like right at the top, not at the end of it, at the top of it.
So almost like the TLDR is right here if you want to go check it out.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you sharing the knowledge. You can go and check out Amit's website at curiousmints.com. If you found this video useful, please do give it a like. And if you want to see more videos every week on all things API, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.